Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear friends and colleagues, dear students, it's a great pleasure for me to welcome you to what is for the college quite a special occasion because we are inaugurating today formally the Google Chair in Digital Innovation and the start of the tenure of Professor Andrea Renda as holder of our first chairholder in digital innovation. Well, I think the subject needs little justification. Digital innovation is one of the great opportunities, one of the society, economy, and even polity changing factors of today. I think each of us is experiencing in our own daily life the impact of digital innovation. And I can only say from my perspective also my professional experience as an academic teacher has certainly changed fundamentally under the impact of digital innovation. It means, for instance, that whereas 25 years ago, as a university professor, I could be reasonably sure to have a monopoly of information when addressing my students. Today, there is always a question, are the students not already better informed than I am because of all the access to information I have very often, even during the lectures, because of the potential of digital innovation. So this just as a small example. The opportunities are clearly huge, but so are the challenges, because digital innovation has, of course, also quite a number of more problematic sides. We see major impact on the labor markets. We see major questions emerging about data protection. And we see policymakers everywhere struggling with the short, medium, and even long-term effects of digital innovation. It's like any major technical innovation in history, double-faced development, a Janus-faced development, where you have on the one hand huge opportunities, hugely positive elements of evolution, and at the same time quite a number of problems and potentially even risks. And it must be our ambition to try to maximize the positive potential and to reduce to the greatest possible extent the potentially problematic and negative implications. The College of Europe since 1949 has always had the mission to contribute to actually finding solutions to cross-border challenges by providing a major investment and also an investment with innovative elements to the preparation of its students to responsibilities in European institutions, national policy-making institutions, but also in the private sector, to help students fully realize cross-border challenges and help them to work on solutions, on positive, constructive solutions to these challenges. From this perspective, the choice of the subject, digital innovation, is fully in line with the college's tradition since 1949, because through this chair, the college hopes to be able to make a contribution to make students think critically, constructively, and with the aim to later in their careers to make a positive contribution to mastering the many challenges of digital innovation. We are very grateful that Google, obviously major company with whom we have cooperated for quite some time already, has actually agreed to sponsor the establishment of this chair. I can say that the public subsidies which the colleges receive would normally not allow the creation of a chair with a financial envelope which also allows to engage in a number of subsidiary activities such as organizing conferences, special lectures, etc. So we had a very constructive number of meetings with Google in preparation for the establishment of this chair. And I would also like to say here that it has been a very positive experience, because at no stage in the procedure has Google ever made the slightest effort to actually interfere with academic independence of the chair's orientation. I also emphasize this here because, believe it or not, I was already contacted by media asking critical questions whether actually the investment of Google at college would not be contrary to academic independence, whether this Google chair would perhaps be following certain interests of Google. I can assure you that if there would have been the slightest hint of such an attempted influence, the college would never have agreed to the establishment. On the contrary, Google has emphasized right from the start whatever the chairholder brings in terms of orientations, that is not a matter to be discussed in any way with Google. And I'm sure also Professor Render would never have accepted the chair if it would not have been fully reassured on the complete academic independence of this chair. So we have a very good cooperation with Google. We are really grateful for Google to make this investment, because it is an investment in future generations of students and decision makers here at the College of Europe. But as I said, we are today not only inaugurating the chair, but also your tenure as first chairholder, Andrea. I would like to say that I could not imagine we could have found a better candidate for this chair, because you are combining experiences in different professional dimensions, dealing with regulatory impact assessment, with regulatory policy and digital innovation in particular. You combine, from my perspective, in an ideal way, the world of think tank experience. You are heading the regulatory policy unit at the Center of European Policy Studies in Brussels, with a career as an academic, having taught at many distinguished universities, including most recently with a post at Duke University in the United States, University of Rotterdam, the European University Institute, the College of Europe, I also mentioned, with a very impressive list of publications. I will leave it to my colleague Fedor Nikolaidis to say a bit more about the substance also of your publications. But to combine all this also with a policy advisory function, because you have advised the European Union institution, Commission, the European Parliament, but also the OECD, the World Bank. So from the college perspective, this makes an ideal fit. I would almost say an ideal marriage with the college, because the college, as all our students know, always has tried to combine pure academic expertise with the expertise of policymakers and practitioners. And also from this perspective, I think you bring a lot to the college. I would like to perhaps end with a remark that you have also a lot of transatlantic experience, a lot of experience in the United States, which we also think ideally fits with the recent investment of the college in building up a new powerful partnership with the Fletcher School in Law and Diplomacy, which means a new departure for the college also in terms of transatlantic links. So I hope also that your contribution in this context will help us achieving our mission. It's now my pleasure to hand over to Professor Fedor Nikolaidis, Director of the Economics Department, whom I thank for having chaired so effectively the selection board, which appointed Professor Render to this chair. And please, Fedor, I leave it to you then to do a more substantive introduction. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Rector. A couple of years ago, ladies and gentlemen, we asked our students to take a look at the curriculum and tell us where they thought we could improve. Naturally, if you are students, you get a lot of ideas. But the idea that emerged through this response we got was that they thought what we offered could be strengthened by adding something on the new digital economy. So we discussed it with the rector, we had the agreement of the academic council, and we launched the selection procedure. I had the pleasure, sometimes it was a burden, but in the end it was a great pleasure to chair the selection committee. We had many applications, and there were many people, many candidates with lots of technical expertise, but we were impressed by Andreas's wide experience and knowledge, not just on the issues of digital technologies, digital economy, the challenges that are emerging in the field of competition, but of course, also his experience and knowledge of impact assessment. For example, Andrea is one of the fathers of impact assessment, regulatory impact assessment in the European Union. He is one of the foremost experts in the field of internal market. And when it comes to the challenges, policy challenges posed by the new technologies, it's not just the disruption, the disruptive effect that the rector alluded to in his introduction. It's also the fact that there is a number of other challenges. And you will see some of these challenges in this lecture. It's not just about competition, it's not about market access, it's not about protecting the rights of consumers or protecting the ability of competitors to compete with giants like Google. But the new technologies also raise a number of other issues. The rector mentioned data protection. Andrea will tell you that in fact, they also raise extreme and very uncomfortable ethical issues. The other day, I was about to board a plane, and my telephone began sending me messages. Have you downloaded your boarding pass? And I was wondering, how on earth does my phone know that I'm about to go on a trip? Well, my telephone knows. My telephone is intelligent, and my telephone has apparently access to many things I thought they were only mine. But yeah, that's the new technology. The new technology is intelligent. Intelligent in the sense that it interacts with its environment, learns, and adapts. But this fact of interaction and adaptation creates ethical dilemmas and confronts us with very uncomfortable issues that policymakers will have to resolve. One of the questions that Professor Renda will be raising is in his lecture, in how much autonomy should these new technologies be given? How much discretion should they have? How much control should we have? But the moment we exercise control, we bring the new technologies back to our level, and we are very imperfect. We're intelligent, but very imperfect. We forget. We cannot calculate very quickly. So there are fundamental dilemmas there. And I think it's very correctly Professor Renda in his lecture seeks to expose these dilemmas. We all benefit from new technologies. The disruptive effect may benefit consumers to the expense of companies, but that's okay. Companies will also have to adjust. But there are other issues that do not seem to be so solvable. And I think, Rector, we have made a very wise choice. We are congratulating ourselves already. In deciding that the first holder of this chair that has been so generously sponsored by Google, and I have to tell you that without the sponsorship, we wouldn't have been able to get Professor Renda here, because at the time that we made him the offer, he was in the United States at Duke University, and he was considering a competing offer. With the meager resources we have at our disposal, we couldn't have competed effectively with a very large American university. So indeed, we are thankful. But I was saying that I believe we have made the right choice, because Professor Renda began his career by studying economics at Lewis University. Then he switched to law, where he got a master in Hamburg, and then he concluded with a PhD in economics at Erasmus University. So he has had knowledge both of economics and law, and through his work in Brussels, he has come to understand that policymaking, in fact, is about compromises and finding the right balance between competing objectives. And I think this experience equips him perfectly well to carry on the tasks of the Google chair in understanding, exposing the benefits and the challenges created by new technologies. And of course, the objective of the chair is to disseminate as widely as possible these new insights. We begin today with the inaugural lecture, but we have another event coming up in April, the 10th of April. Please put it in your diaries. We're going to have a number of very high-level speakers. Member of the commission will be here as well. It will be the first of a series of annual events organized on the theme of the digital economy. And as I'm sure you know very well, the European Commission has made a number of proposals recently in the last year or two on how to strengthen the digital internal market, the digital single market. And we very much hope, we very much aspire to make a credible input into the formulation of the new policies. So without further ado, I welcome the first chairholder of the Google Chair to enlighten us on ethics, algorithms, and self-driving cars.
Thanks, Peter. All right, thank you very much. I mean, I'm deeply honored by the very detailed and very positive presentations that I've received. With you have also studied my CV, which is super. You had to do it before, of course, during the selection process. I am very deeply honored and very excited, because we're about to start a journey with 20 unhappy few or happy few students that have been selected for our course on digital innovation. And I hope that these 20 students will come with me, will bear with me on what will be a journey that officially starts then on the 29th of January, but it officially starts today with this inaugural lecture that will bring us through many, many aspects of digital innovation. And I think it will bring us also into a number of questions that, as Professor Nicolaides was mentioning before, are not just economic questions, are not just the standard policy questions related to market failures or regulatory failures, but also in some cases cutting across different disciplines in social sciences and also in natural science, sort of computer science in particular. But the ones that we'll explore today are mostly the ethical ones, which in most cases are the most difficult to deal with. Also because we come from several decades of primacy of leadership of economics and the analysis of what we call evidence-based policy making. So in the art of, or craft, if you wish, of offering policymakers with the arguments they need in order to take more informed choice. And we are stuck in a moment in which economists, in my opinion, stop having easy answers to some of the issues that happen. Of course, we've been through the financial crisis. That was also a big blow to the economic theory, and we've had many others before. But in these cases, we really are in a situation, as I will try to explain in a few minutes, in which we face trade-offs between competing policy principles. And on one side, we typically have the leading goals in economics, such as economic efficiency or pursuing of social welfare with the so-called neoclassical tools that we normally use in economics. And on the other hand, maybe we have fairness, or these concepts that are sometimes very elusive for an economist and for social scientists in general, if not for the ethicists and the philosophers. But even if you look and dig a bit into ethics and philosophy and try to look for the definition of fairness, you will see a plethora of diverging definitions. So we really are a bit puzzled in economics. I'll make one example before we start. There's a book, I will mention this book later. There's a book that is one of the best sellers currently in the economics of competition law. It's a book by Maurice Stucke and Ariel Ezraki called Virtual Competition, that tells us one thing. I'm not commenting on the merit of the book, but the issue it raises is the following. We are observing markets that totally look like perfectly competitive markets. There's a lot of information, there's a lot of choice, and there's a price that is the same for most of the companies or all the companies that participate in the market. So what is this? Perfect competition? Maybe. Or maybe it's perfect collusion. Because in perfect competition, the price moves always in the same way. For all the companies, all the prices are aligned, and that's the same that happens when there's collusion. And economists currently don't have a way to give an answer to this question. We have been waiting forever for perfect competition to materialize. Microeconomists have been dreaming about perfect competition to happen as an empirical case study, just as much as the macroeconomists wait for cases of hyperinflation to see how it evolves. See all the macroeconomists observing what happens in Venezuela without doing anything, just because they want to know how it ends up, and people are suffering. Here, microeconomists are a bit less damaging. In this case, it's less dangerous. But still, we've been waiting for this forever, and now that we see it, we don't know if we like it or not. We don't know if it's good or bad. Now, what I'm going to do today, it's a different type of exercise, but still along these lines. You see, I think I could do a summary of the course, or I could do, a fast forward through to what I'm going to say in the course. I think it wouldn't do justice to the big group that we have here today, and it would be also too rough and unrefined. So what I've tried to do is to try to approach things from a slightly different angle compared to what we normally do, and to start asking one question and then distill from this question other questions. And this is an exercise that I recently completed in a paper. The Center for European Policy Studies has published this paper. You find it on the website this morning. It's been embargoed until today, but you can still, if it's still some trace of interest in you after this class, you can still download it and read it. And hopefully, with some changes and expansions, this paper will become a working paper for the Department of Economics, or a policy paper for the Department of Economics of the college, which would make me particularly honored. All right, so where do I start from? It's a reflection that indeed comes back to the days in which I was a duke, because I was invited as a professor from Rome and the leader of the regulatory policy practice at CEPS. I was invited for a period of visiting professorship that then turned into a professorship for a second year at Duke University to work on regulation. And they say, well, we'll welcome you to the Keenan Institute for Ethics. I say, I'm sorry, maybe I'm in the wrong room. They say, no, we have a rethinking regulation program in the Keenan Institute for Ethics in Duke. I say, okay, that's fantastic. So I've been surrounded by philosophers, computer scientists, experts in robotics, experts from the Brain Center, and then, of course, economists, lawyers, political scientists for 2 years. And I've realized also that when we look at technology, sometimes we tend to focus on the same old questions and on the same questions that in our own individual academic fields we've been asking and sometimes even answering, but not very often, for many years. So that's one example. And the example is an example of what I call the trolley problem. I don't know how many people in the room have ever had to face the trolley problem. It's typically taught in ethics or in philosophy. So some people here know this. I'm going to briefly summarize this, and then I'm going to ask some question. Now, I'm going to start by picturing myself as in 80 years, I say 2025, crossing a street with 3 friends, okay? Well, hopefully 3 friends, but Anyway, you know this picture, regardless of the age. This is Abbey Road from the Beatles, but they are crossing the street. There's one who's barefoot. And I'm thinking about, imagine that at some point while I'm crossing the street, I'm the barefoot guy. So Paul McCartney. And maybe I go over, I don't know, a piece of glass, or I hurt myself. So I have to stop in the middle of the street for a second because I'm suffering from something, a scar on my foot, and it hurts. Meanwhile, a self-driving car is approaching. And the self-driving car might not realize that I'm in there because I'm not supposed to be there. Maybe there was a traffic light and traffic light is red. I'm in the middle of the street and I'm not supposed to be there. The self-driving car might know or not know that I was supposed or not supposed to be there. This is something that we have to figure out. But the self-driving car might end up in a situation in which a collision with me or a group of people or an alternative course of action is absolutely, choosing something is inevitable and a collision is inevitable. Either the car will hurt me or it will hurt somebody else. There's a possibility also of not hurting any pedestrian, but hurting the people inside the car. And this is a question that I've heard asked on and on in all the artificial intelligence conferences over the past 2-3 years, where people, rather than trying to approach other topics in artificial intelligence, typically organize conferences or write papers or keep asking themselves, what is the self-driving car going to do when the self-driving car cannot avoid hitting someone? And this goes back to this famous problem, the trolley problem, which is a problem that is taught in philosophy, where there is a trolley, there's a tram there. So people that, live in Belgium know very well these types of vehicles. And the trolley ends up in a situation in which if it keeps going straight on the tracks, it will find 5 people that are there and it will hit them and kill them. But there's a guy over there who's the guy that can act. And it could be any of you, and typically it's better that you are one of that guy rather than one of the other 6 involved, right? And so typically a professor doesn't venture into putting you in such a difficult situation like the ones they're laying down. But the guy there has a possibility of activating a switch so that the trolley will change direction and it will kill the person that is there on the other track. And the typical question that follows is, what would you do if you were that guy? I say guy just because it seems to be a guy from the picture, not a lady. What would you do? Well, some people would say, well, I would actually activate the switch because killing one person is better than killing 5. Other people would say, and this is where the example becomes meaningful, the problem that I have is that if I don't do anything, things will develop and deploy in the way in which they would have anyway without my intervention. But if I actively participate here, I'm going to be the one that has killed that guy. So my conscience tells me that there is something worse in having done something material to determine the death of that person, and this makes me refrain from acting in that way. So if you change the example, there's another way of putting the trolley problem. You have an even more complicated situation. That you are on top of a bridge and you know that something is happening, but you happen to be standing next to a very fat and heavy guy. And that's your choice. You know that if you close your eyes and push the guy down from the bridge on the tracks, you have somehow certainty that the trolley will deviate and will not kill the 5 people. Then are you going to do this or not? And then the percentage of people that say, well, I would actually do it is even lower, of course. Despite the fact that, in principle, but this is something that we might want to discuss together, and certainly we'll discuss it throughout the course, it would potentially be better, it should be better, or I don't know if it's better, but it should be better to save 5 lives, sacrificing only 1. Now, while this has been a mantra and ethics for a long time without specific solutions, in this paper that I published this morning, I already quote all sorts of variations of the trolley problem, people that imagine how Buddhist monks or how Immanuel Kant would have solved the trolley problem. The issue is now becoming even more complicated because if we imagine that it is a self-driving car that has to take the decision, not any of us, then this puzzles us because there might be cases in which the machine intentionally decides to kill us. Now, what is the solution? Should a self-driving car that happens to be in a situation in which it's too late to avoid killing someone decides to go for the lower number, the smaller object? This is why I imagine myself that, well, I'm already small enough, but being hurt and being there in the middle of the street, smaller object, or what should be the criterion? Well, there's a lot of divergence in the literature already on this. If you go on the MIT's Moral Machine website, you will see that the MIT prompts you in a number of different scenarios to see how you would solve, or how you would ask the self-driving car to solve the problem. These are cases in which there's a crowd and the car on the far left decides to kill a bystander, not to kill the whole group there. There's a case in which the car decides to deviate and then hit a wall, thereby killing the occupants. And there's here a solution in which the same is done with a group. So A, B, C are all different situations in which we need to ask ourselves, what would we want these cars to do? And there's a lot of diverging opinions. Well, in some cases, these cars, what we know is that they're not very good at recognizing objects, right? And things can happen in whatever road around the world. This picture was sent to me on the day before Thanksgiving, by the way, by my sister-in-law who lives in upstate New York, Mamaroneck, north of New York, and she saw this thing happening. The turkey is sensing that something is happening. It's that Thanksgiving is happening and then running away. And the car's, of course, getting in trouble in this. A self-driving car might recognize a turkey there, might also not recognize a turkey there. And I'm going to get back to this problem in a second. Well, in late 2016, Mercedes was pretty clear about what their cars would do. They already announced the fact that their cars, I mean, we already assumed that the guy inside, when Freedom was talking about a big Mercedes that he saw today, that typically there is, the guy inside might be, pretty wealthy, so, worth preserving if you wish. From a neoclassical economics point of view, you see that Mercedes has no doubt. I mean, if we want to sell cars, we have a pretty selfish clientele. We might want to reassure them. And in these cases, no matter if there's Woodstock in front of them, thousands and thousands of people, a big crowd, we're still going to protect the driver. Well, pity that the day after, the Ministry of Transportation in Germany stepped in and said, well, actually, we are working on 3 completely different principles for these cars. The cars certainly must opt for property damage over personal injury, but we are in a different case now. We are already in a situation in which collision is inevitable. We have to decide whom will be killed. The second principle, but this never became official law, but the car never distinguishes between human space on categories such as age or race. This is revolutionary. Now we are in a completely new post-evidence, post-fact, post-truth era in which countries are discriminated also verbally very, very easily. And also, if a human removes his or her hands from the steering wheel, check email, say, the car's manufacturer is liable if there's a collision. There's a sort of strict liability of the car manufacturer. We should sort of shape the incentives not to rely too much on individuals to step in and drive those cars actively or be ready to step in, which also brings us back to a number of accidents that have already taken place, such as accidents with Tesla cars, in which the system, in principle, would prompt individuals to step in and start holding the steering wheel. But this, I don't see what's the added value of having a self-driving car if this means that you have to be with your hands on the steering wheel, very close to the steering wheel, ready to grab it in case there is something going on. So my answer to this problem is mu. In the jargon of Buddhist monks, mu is my favorite answer. It means don't ask the question. Or please stop focusing on this very extreme case. If you talk with the computer scientists, If you talk with machine learning people that are working on those issues, they will tell you that so many things have gone wrong for this situation to happen that it's probably not even a good idea to focus so much on this and leave aside many other very, very important topics that we're not dealing with. Sorry for the false start, but this was a false start, meaning the first slides were completely meaningless, meaning I'm not going to try to solve the trolley problem. What I'm going to try to do is a different thing. Look in the rearview mirror and do a CSI, a crime scene investigation. So imagine this has happened. You get there, you are the detectives now, and you start asking yourselves a number of questions to try and figure out what has happened and how to act from there. So, how did the car end up there? How did we allow the car to interact with human beings in this way? So to create a situation in which a machine can decide over human life. Second, do we know anything about what the car knew? Third, what do we know about how the car decided? We don't know anything about these things. We can't solve the trolley problem under these conditions. Would we expect the car to behave like we would? Better? Worse? We don't know this. We haven't decided this. And finally, of course, that's the end of the investigation. Who's liable? Now, my claim here for this next few minutes is I want to go through these questions with you because I think that if we don't ask ourselves, how will we approach these questions, we are not really looking at the problem in the right way. We're still trying to solve a very abstract situation, and we still have so many choices to make before this situation will occur that we can actually shape the way in which it occurs. We can also actually decide whether it will occur. So I'll start with a bold question. How did the car end up there? Are we sure that the car should end up there? For example, a few years ago we were talking about carless cities, how to get rid of cars from city centers. Today, maybe because of a bit of too much of lobby from large corporations and companies that have vested interest in this, but we're actually only discussing how to accommodate self-driving cars in city centers, how to organize urban transportation in a way that would incorporate those cars. But we have choices. Even if we choose to have self-driving cars in cities, contrary to what some big cities are doing already, planning that maybe by 2025 there will be no cars in city centers, we could actually talk about how to introduce these cars in a way that cars never interact with pedestrians. Pedestrian bridges, dedicated lanes, differences and changes in the road infrastructure that would make this unhappy encounter impossible. There's also the possibility of phasing in self-driving cars only where dedicated infrastructure is available. For example, high-speed lanes in highways or only highways, and then only at the very end they would get into the situation in which things are so complicated that some of these cars cannot really handle all the information, which is the urban situation in which so many things happen at once, so many objects move, and cars in this moment are completely unable to detect images and understand what's going on. So before we can actually get, this is MIT with Toyota, to a situation in which we analyze the movement of objects and understand that these are human beings and how to deal with the interaction with them, without even thinking about the criterion that those cars should decide before deciding, should use before deciding who should be the victim. Before we get there, it's probably going to be a long time. Currently, cars sometimes still have problems in detecting, the difference between the dog and a frog, or a human being that is tying his shoes and a dog. Or, and this is, if you look at the static images in cases like ImageNet or other cases, this is already, machine learning is getting better and better at this, but when it comes to moving images, forget about it. So, are we going to run this risk or not? We also have the problem that when we talk about these problems, these issues, and this is something that we will go through during the 30 hours of the course on and on again, we imagine the future always in a very monodimensional way. Everything looks the same, but there's a self-driving car. There could be cases in which pedestrians are helped through, this is a case of Starling crossing, for example. They use a technique called a stigmergy to really change the signs in the street to really help people decide when and how to cross the street. There could be countless other technologies that help us in signaling the occurrence of a problem or a risk. And normally we approach this problem by thinking that cars will be cars as we know them today. There will be no car trains, car pods or other thing, or hyperloops or other things. Pedestrians will behave the way they behave today. We will cross the street the way we would jaywalk the way we jaywalk today, and so on and so forth. This doesn't have to be the case. So the first lesson that I want to draw from this is, first of all, we cannot think statically and one-dimensionally about technological evolution. And this is a mistake that we make every day. Be that about organ donation and algorithms, or self-driving cars, or the future of blockchain and distributed ledgers. We always keep thinking about one variable that changes and the rest remains the same. And I think we cannot afford making that mistake with all these technologies that are coming to maturity at the same time. This is what's happening today. Second thing, we can still make choices. We can still decide to keep the humans in control. And we can also decide to avoid certain situations from happening, even if the situation in which self-driving cars go very close to pedestrians is a situation that maximizes efficiency. This is not necessarily the situation that we have to choose in public policy. There's also a key reason for this, also for the companies that are involved, because even if self-driving cars can save an estimated 30,000 lives a year, for that one life that is lost because a self-driving car arbitrarily chose whom to kill, this reduces the acceptability of this technology in the market. It could kill or put the market, freeze the market for a few years. So I think these choices are choices that we don't discuss enough. We'll discuss them in the course, but we don't discuss them enough in Brussels, for example. But let me go into the second question. What did the car know? How can we solve this problem if we don't know what the car knew? We don't know, not because we don't know it in this room. We don't know what the car knew in this case, because we haven't come to a conclusion as to what data cars will be using when deciding where to go. Examples, most self-driving cars coming from the US, including Apple's recent patent on self-driving cars, base their decisions only on vehicle-to-vehicle communication. Google's Waymo cars only base their decision on sensors. So like us, meaning, well, we have navigators and other things, but indeed, like if they were human beings, they only look around, detect objects, and decide where to go. The idea in most of these cases is to minimize the use of maps, to minimize the creation of a data set that is external to the car, that the car can look at, can make use of when deciding where to go and how to act. But in Europe, we're taking a different direction. For us, cars could be using not only their sensors, but also 5G communications, data that come from streetlights, cameras that are on streetlights or in buildings. Everything that could be used from the environment, what you see there, V2E, vehicle to environment, is something that could potentially be used by the car. Which one would you in principle prefer? Would you delegate the choice over killing or not killing, or maybe being killed to avoid a frog, to a car that only knows what other cars have told this car, or a car that only sees, decides on the basis of what it sees, or from a car that has to and manages a much bigger amount of information, hopefully in a timely way, because otherwise there's no reason. I'm asking because I don't know the answer to this question, because in principle I would say, more information, better decision, but we will get to a situation in a few minutes where there's more and more information has a limit. A limit that maybe you don't want to cross, or some people want to cross and others don't want to cross. So most likely in Europe we'll end up having and using a combination of fixed line, wireless, satellite, sensor-generated information, but we don't know these yet. So how do you want to solve the trolley problem if you don't know how these cars behave? And again, I know I'm going to say this several times. because I'm frustrated that I've been like at 20 conferences on the trolley problem. So I don't want to share fully this frustration with you, but I just want to tell you that the bright minds of many of the ethicists and the philosophers and the technology experts could probably be devoted to better uses rather than focusing so much on the self-driving, the trolley problem for self-driving cars. There's also a possibility of creating immutable, constantly updated, but constantly verifiable distributed databases that keep a constantly updated map of the road, of who's on the road and who's moving on the road and so on, especially if you use distributed ledger technologies by solving a number of technical problems that they have today, such as latency and even privacy in some cases. And I'm talking about blockchain technologies. Toyota, Porsche, Daimler are working on those. And then when it comes to the limits to the information that the car can use, what did the car know about the individuals involved? This is a question that I keep pending for later, because the cars could actually discriminate between individuals in some cases, deciding to hit someone and not another just because of the different characteristics of those individuals. Science fiction? No. But we get to this later. Also, we don't know what the cars know about other cars. And this brings in the problem of whether users will be able to reprogram the priorities and the way cars behave, or everything will be fully standardized. This also we don't know. In principle, we tend to think that people should not be able to modify the preferences and the behavior of their cars so that other cars could get to know exactly what kind of behavior they should expect. But it could also happen that cars could behave in a more selfish, more aggressive, less aggressive way depending on how users have reprogrammed them. And there is a paper that have come out recently where 3 scholars imagine the addition of an ethical knob in the car that the user can turn from fully altruistic to total ass, whatever. Very aggressive. I'm saying ace, meaning, someone that can drive very well. So there's a battle of the data architecture. If you look at the patent that Apple's lodged patent application last year, this is only for information that is passed on between vehicles. So the cars will not have all the information available. They only will have the information that is word of mouth. A car is going through this and saying, I saw a pedestrian trying to cross the street, I pass on this information. But this is a bit like the taxi drivers that talk to each other all the time and say, okay, you don't go that way, there's a lot of traffic there. Third problem, what do we know about, even if we knew how the car is supposed to be deciding, do we know how the car decides in the end? And this brings in another problem, which is the problem of what we call algorithmic transparency and accountability. Here are a few questions that we have on the table. We don't have solutions currently, but by the end of the course, we'll all have the solution. Should users and car owners have the right to understand how the algorithm takes decision? There's a big debate on the fact that in our current general data protection regulation at the EU level, there was a floating provision, which ended up more in the recitals than in the main text at the end of the ordinary legislative procedure, that says that users have a right to explanation. Meaning they are supposed to be exposed to an explanation, to a description of how the algorithm has reached a decision. If you talk to the machine learning people, they told you sometimes we don't even know how the algorithm has reached an outcome. Because with deep learning, algorithms tend to learn from their past behavior and from other algorithms over time to an extent that the original developers cannot fully predict what their decisions would be. So there is a divergence here between the experts and the users, and we have to make a choice. I'm sure that if we really impose this principle, the experts will find a way to make sure that there's predictability in the algorithms, but that's not going to be easy. Even if we know what the algorithm inner working should be, how are we going to inspect this? Talking about, we can talk also about things like the Google antitrust decision that we're going to also deal with, although briefly in class. You can tell a company that they have to modify their algorithm in a particular way, but when the algorithm is updated 500 times a year, that's not very easy to check, unless you have a way to audit and inspect the algorithms. Taboo, because algorithms are intellectual property and trade secret in most cases, and the ability to inspect and audit algorithms is not easy to discuss in terms of public policy, although it seems to be increasingly accepted in the technical community. Also, insurance companies, they want to tell you how dangerous this car is. Should they be enabled to inspect the internal working and design of the algorithm to set their premiums? Should there be black boxes at the least that would enable us to determine what has happened, reconstruct the process, and see how did the car take a decision? We don't know this. We are discussing this. We don't have solutions for this, for any of the algorithms. So I can tell you, I'm waiting, for example, I could be someone waiting for an organ, and there is a donation, there's one organ available, and the algorithm says it should go to somebody else. Or I should be the one that has applied for being recruited in a bank or in a university or selected for college in the United States, and the algorithm says it should be somebody else. Do I have a right to an explanation of why this other person has been selected? Even before we discuss how the decision has been made, because that's going to be even the most controversial of all. All the algorithms, and this is just a first taxonomy of algorithms that we deal with on a daily basis, have this potential problem. This is so serious that we got to an extent, these are 3 examples of nice books that have come out of last couple of years. All of them, in one way or the other, demonize algorithms. Because the fact that they are so intransparent sometimes and impenetrable creates a situation in which the outcomes, however fair they are, and most often they can be considered to be unfair, are also impossible to relate to a process of decision making. And this raises the arbitrariness of the whole thing. Well, this for the students in the course, you're not going to have to read all these books, don't worry. And this is the book that I was mentioning before about perfect competition, perfect collusion. It's a virtual competition book. Weapons of Math Destruction is a very interesting book by Cathy O'Neill, who's a machine learning person that worked a lot in finance. And Frank Pasquale teaches at the University of Maryland. He wrote this very nice book on algorithms that dominate finance in particular. So, you see, borrowing here from my friend Luciano Floridi and his colleagues from Oxford, if you want to map a little bit those ethical concerns that we have in algorithms, before we go trying to solve the other few questions and then close and wrap up, we have a number of epistemic concerns with algorithms that depend also on our previous question. How much data, how much information do we allow these algorithms to process? So there might be cases in which there might be inconclusive evidence, and then algorithms have to act like Herbert Simon used to say that humans act in neuroscience, in a satisficing way. When we see that something is, we have reasonable certainty that that's a good course of action. Should the algorithm act or not? There could be cases of inscrutable evidence and we have a problem of transparency. There will be cases in which there's bad quality of data coming in and bad outcomes of the decision. It's a typical problem of garbage in and garbage out. But there's also a problem of normative concerns, cases in which the outcomes are unfair. And there might be several cases in which a perfectly elegant and correct algorithm comes up with very unfair outcomes. There could be transformative effects, that algorithms over time develop their own version of reality, so they distance themselves with their decisions from reality, and there be the problems of responsibility, what we call traceability, who's liable, who's contributed to the damage. And this is a bit also the space in which I'm moving in all these questions. Also, just if anything, but very quickly, we actually don't know what algorithms are going to be used in self-driving cars. This is something that Fidon was alluding to before in his presentation. One could use neural networks or adaptive self-learning algorithms. They're very advanced, but they're not very transparent and predictable. So the acceptability of their outcomes is very questionable. It could be that you only feed a lot of information into these algorithms and try to make sure that they become more and more accurate in detecting objects. But even in that case, this is not very efficient. These are very inefficient learning machines. Those machine learning projects typically require probably at least 10 times, probably 100 times more information that we would need to take a decision. There's also the possibility that we just replicate human behavior. So we just teach machines to behave exactly like us. So incorporating our biases, our imperfections, and so on. But then I don't know why we're doing it. But there are a couple of papers that actually come with the conclusion that self-driving cars should be impulsive like human beings are. So sort of we degrade the functioning of the algorithm in a way that replicates the imperfections of the human beings so that this increases acceptability. Pretty strange topic, right? Anyway, these are for the there's a piece missing there, for the FATML, so the academic coalition for fair, accountable, and transparent machine learning have also very much linked to the World Wide Web Foundation has come up with principles of algorithmic fairness, transparency, and accountability, which include the so-called auditability and responsibility of the developers. But we don't have this in our legislation, and it's going to be years and probably a lot of battles before we can include auditability of algorithms in our legislation. I'll try to be a bit clearer in the next few minutes and also try to be brief, because otherwise I'll be too long. Fourth problem, and some people that have very good memory will remember that the problems are 5, so we're not doing too bad. We're coming close to the end. But that's an important question, because we don't have the solution to this either. Should algorithms behave like us or better? And it's exactly where I ended up when I was talking about self-driving cars potentially behaving like us. What do you think? Should algorithms be better than us?
Yes.
Yes? All right, let me try to give you a set of provocations. Our society is biased. So if I want to try and decide if I should hit the, let's say, old man who appears to be poor on the street, or deviate and hit the young yuppie manager in his 30s who appears to be earning a lot of money, regardless of whether the car is driven or self-driving, a rational human being has no hesitation. I should go and hit the old man. I'm sorry. Because our tort law bases damage compensation on foregone earnings, lucrum cessans, which means my exposure in terms of liability is much lower if I hit the old guy. Our society is biased. Our legal system is biased in many respects. So I'm going to ask you a few questions, but we don't need to answer all of them. So there's a possibility the car could use, for example, cost-benefit analysis. Or it could use a Rawlsian lexicographic ordering when deciding that human life should be always put at the forefront, like in the German case, the German Ministry of Transportation. In the case of cost-benefit analysis, we could be a case in which I have 3 people in front of me, I could deviate, but then I would damage the Colosseum, which is by itself damaged enough by the Romans, but not the ancient one, the contemporary ones. But you know, in principle, a car could also weigh the damage to cultural heritage as opposed to killing someone. So a pure cost-benefit analysis would put also property and personal injury on the same level. Okay, imagine that this is going to happen. It's going to be human beings. Okay, even within this category, we don't know how to act. There's an emerging efficiency privacy trade-off in this respect. We know that the more we push the level of detail that algorithms can reach, the more we discriminate. Machine learning experts will tell you, we want to know if people have repaid their debts in the past, if they have paid their bills, if they have even cheated on their wives or husbands, because this gives us an idea of how trustworthy they are, and before we give them a loan, we want to know this. If you talk to the machine learning people, they, of course, it's rightly so, they don't think about the fact that there is a slight fundamental right that is called privacy. Fundamental right in Europe, at least. And this might be preserved before you actually use all this information in selecting the most optimal, more sufficient decision. So the more they discriminate, the more they're efficient, but there's a limit to this, at least in terms of our social acceptance. To what extent would people trade off privacy in exchange for accuracy? For example, I'm going to mention Google here, but just because it happened, and there's a very good scholar at New York University, Latanya Sweeney, that has done research on this in the past. We say, typically, we found that search engine like Google is 60% more likely to show an ad for a highly paid job to what it perceives to be a white male, as opposed to an African-American woman. Is this Google's fault, or is this reality's fault? Is this the world that is biased, or is the algorithm that is exacerbating this bias? Interesting question, because it gets us back to the issue, should algorithms be like us or better than us? Could we criminalize a company for replicating an existing bias or exacerbating it, in the latter case more likely, or not? An algorithm that knows what people like is very effective. Netflix's algorithm explains 60% of its revenues. So it recommends the next movie. It knows so much about you that it's much better to recommend the next movie than any friend you have. And then you end up clicking on that. The Predpol software, which according to some people replicates Minority Report in many cities because it tells police stations where they should send their troops because a crime is about to happen, indeed is simply a statistical tool that tells you always go in the same ghetto. Because this is where, I mean, in Brussels we have Molenbeek. We could have used that more in the past. Because typically people say, where there's, or other neighborhood with high crime levels, of course, any machine that elaborates this data would say, go there. Not because they have a sixth sense, just because they know what's happened in the past. There's a difference between capacity and intelligence. And even in this case, I mean, some police officers have claimed, and stations have claimed that they have achieved important reductions in crime rates, at least in the short term, but in the end, there is a recursiveness in all this, where basically the police is always sent in the same places. Of course, if you know that someone is in Molenbeek and is picking up the phone and is asking for a very large taxi, and these are people that have their digital footprints, and they end up in an airport when you can use facial recognition, you are as invasive as possible and you are as effective as possible. And these, of course, are the people that were seen in the Brussels airport right before the terrorist attack. So where do we strike the balance between accuracy, intrusiveness and invasiveness of technologies, and individual freedom and rights to privacy? We don't have this answer. And of course, after events like this, people have become much more willing to surrender a little bit more of their privacy in exchange for more security. In principle, if I knew everything about a person, have they paid their bills? Have they cheated on their girlfriends, boyfriends? How many friends they have? How reputed they have? I could actually make a very easy calculation. Have 3 people there, 2 people inside the car. I can sum up their social credit scores. Yeah, the social credit score, well, this is what is being done, piloted in China by Alibaba, Tencent, and many others with the Chinese government. Every individual has a score, which is the trustworthiness of the individual. In principle, an algorithm could decide to minimize the loss of social credit by hitting the persons or the group that overall has an aggregate social credit score that is lower than the other. Do you like this? Well, if you look at Facebook's patent on authorization and authentication based on an individual social network, this is not going to happen only in China. And we also already see, for example, in Germany, there are a couple of companies that are using public information that we put on Facebook and other social networks to advise insurance companies on how to modify their premia based on their assessment of how trustworthy that person would be, how much they drink, and so on and so forth. So the society is evolving in a way that we probably are very far away. Does anyone remember the trolley problem? That's where we started from. So here's the trolley problem. Sorry for the very bad images on top of the people's heads there. Or you can ask, maybe when we are in class, if I see that people like music, I could say, imagine they're the Beatles on the right and the Rolling Stones on the left. And what would you do? In many cases, I mean, how is the car going to decide where to go? If the car has an enormous amount of information, and this is what I was mentioning before, where I kept this question pending, in principle, the car could choose in a very detailed way to preserve the most trustworthy people. But indeed, when we use cost-benefit analysis in public policy and we use the value of a statistical life to monetize benefits in terms of saved lives, sometimes we do a similar calculation. We incorporate a lot of the income, we incorporate a number of other elements in the value of a statistical life formula, which are not necessarily very easy to digest for people that that do economic analysis and people that have to take policy decisions. All right, so we got there. Who's liable? Who's going to be liable for something like this? First of all, there is an ongoing stream of literature that tries to look at how algorithms can distance, because they are also self-learning, they take decisions to some extent autonomously, distance the original tortfeasor, the person that has created that economic activity, from the damage that has occurred. So you could say it's been the algorithm, there's not much I can do about it, it's self-learning, it's like a person, I'm just a developer, I shouldn't be liable for this. The debate is extended to antitrust, both in dominance and collusion. To what extent is the outcome of an algorithm triggering liability? Some people say there's time probably for strict liability of the developers, but like in all debates on strict liability, be this pharmaceuticals or nuclear energy and so on, typically there's one part of the debate that says if you exaggerate with strict liability, you are chilling the incentives to engage in economic activity, because you're attributing too much risk to these people, to the developers, and others they would say we need strict liability because we need a deep pocket, we need someone that will be compensated in case a damage occurs. So we'll go through this in the course, because that's the liability part is a very important part. We have currently, but we don't have answers for this, so it's good to start a 3-year tenure with all questions. This doesn't mean that I commit to give a lecture in 3 years where I give all the answers. Hopefully so, but I'm not sure. We have at least 4 options on the table currently. We can treat robots as individual persons and individual legal entities with rights and duties. This is what the European Parliament is proposing to do with what they call smart autonomous robots. In the course, we will have one day a short visit of the Member of Parliament that is rapporteur for this, Marie Delvaux. We have a second option where we treat robots as animals. There's a legal system of this based on the Latin, the ancient Roman culpa in vigilando, and negligence in monitoring. And so it's a form of strict liability that is also very close to fault-based liability. We could treat robots as slaves, and this is indeed where the word robot comes from. And culpa in negligendo, meaning we put them to the wrong use, in the wrong activity, at the wrong moment. So we are negligent in this respect, so we should be considered liable. Or we just create a wholly new body of rules. Robots like robots. And this, of course, whoever wants to write a thesis on this, I'll be happy, because I don't know what this means. So a couple of other additions, and then I wrap up. In liability, the most important thing is that we design the algorithms, and then we send these vehicles or these products or these services out there, and they interact with the external environment, and this is going to create problems. Interaction between algorithms is something we haven't even started to discuss. Who's liable? For example, when you have 2 algorithms that chase each other in setting the price, each algorithm sets the price on the basis of the other. You can have a big spiral effect that brings the price up. For example, this book, a very normal textbook, at some point on Amazon ended up costing $23 million just because of the interaction between 2 algorithms. Or, for people that remember the financial crisis and the aftermath of this, the flash crash of 245 is a case in which 2 algorithms clash with each other. Individually, they are not meant to create damage, but they are so incompatible with each other that they generate a short circuit and the stock exchange, and in a few minutes the stock exchange goes down 9.2%, wasting hundreds of millions of dollars. Who's liable? We don't know, because these are tools that are not inherently meant to create damages. It is their interaction with other incompatible algorithms that is generating this. And we don't have a legal system that tells us. We have a few things on joint and several liability that we could try to use in our legal system, but I don't think we get as far as finding a solution to this. You can see all this, if you've taken notes, are questions that I'm going to ask at the final exams, the final exam of the course, in just a few weeks from now. So key takeaways from the investigation. It's going to take me like 5 minutes and then I'll wrap up. It's fine, hopefully with you, to bear with me, and then if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. Here's a list of who might get to decide in a situation like this. I'm not going to go through all of this, but at the end, you see, it could be the algorithm that ends up deciding. The issue that I want to underline here is that there are so many things that we don't know about what happens before the trolley problem that deciding how it should be solved is really becoming a childish exercise, in my opinion. So let me get back to this and ask you another thing, because we're not done with the trolley problem, unfortunately. So imagine that now you are not the ones that have to activate the switch, but there's a computer there that can activate the switch. This can create a situation that we have not faced before, a situation in which there's a machine in charge of deciding who should be killed and not. Think about this example that I gave you before. Imagine that the guy over there on the bridge is not a human being, but it's a robot. It's a bystander robot, or he's a caregiver robot. It's a nurse robot. It's just there, crossing the bridge. It realizes that outside its duties, it could do something, like pushing this guy with a very mechanical arm. That's going to be easy, no matter how heavy the guy is. Pushing the guy down and enhance social welfare. Because in principle, you know, the fat guy that costs a lot to the healthcare system would die, and the 5 people would survive. This is exactly when people have fears that robots might take over. This is the only way this can happen. When we generate an algorithm and a distributed set of automas that can execute that algorithm without asking us permission, outside their duties. The moment you have a network of semi-intelligent machines that can take action and try to achieve a result, which is their ultimate goal, enhancing social welfare, neoclassical economists would be happy. The rest, I think, we are into a very dystopian description of reality. But in principle, it is not a scenario that I would exclude. And this doesn't imply intelligence in the strictest sense of the word, the ability to intus legere, to read inside things, but just to execute orders that are elaborated by a network of machines that can observe what's happening in reality and detect the possibility of doing something that advances social welfare. So an emerging quagmire that I see, as I come to the conclusion, we can choose to avoid socially unacceptable situation still and pave the way towards complementarity between humans and robots. If you look at for example, the Asilomar principles, which are principles that have been agreed upon by many algorithm and software developers on ethics and algorithms, they include a chapter, a very detailed chapter on human control over machine. There's a trade-off between data availability and algorithmic accuracy. There's a possible race to the bottom because the ones that can use more detailed information will develop their machines and their algorithms and artificial intelligence more quickly. This is why, for example, China is considered to be the one that will develop more quickly their artificial intelligence. They're already #1 in the worldwide rankings on supercomputers. Then the United States is probably a land in which more information will be available. Europe is probably the most restrictive one. There's potentially room for a race to the bottom there, where principles that we care about, such as privacy, might be completely swept under the carpet in the name of global competition and competitiveness on developing artificial intelligence. There's also a behavioral economics issue there, meaning we might not give the right weight at any given moment in time to the medium to long-term effects of preserving people's privacy. We might be short-termists, like the behavioral economists would say, and give more weights to the, for example, enhanced customization and accuracy of an algorithmic result. And this is potentially a problem that is much closer, compared to everything I've said today, to what we would call a market failure. There's a need for accountability of algorithms. Everybody knows that by now. Well, we don't know how to do this. It could be through core regulatory solutions. It could be through public auditing, third-party auditing, through shifting towards more distributed architectures where everybody can observe everything. There's a need for revising our strict and joint and several liability regimes, but under one of those 4 umbrellas and options that I've described before, by treating robots as X. And we haven't really decided where to go in this respect. You see, we don't know much, indeed. And for one that pretends to teach a course, I also don't know much, I would say. So the paper that you will see posted online, and hopefully in a better version posted on the college's economics department website ends up with a number of hints and policy challenges or response that respond to those 5 questions. But basically, this is a wrap up of what I've said so far. And the only thing I can say to close is that, of course, this is not just about a trolley problem. This is about how do we see technology in general, and how do we project ourselves in the future in a way that makes sense and enables us to have a careful and cautious but also effective approach to how we regulate technology and how we regulate with technology. Fortunately, the Beatles will never end up in a situation where the self-driving car is about to hit them. If anything, this might happen, but not the Beatles. Although this is outdated too. And that said, I think we will try to approach individually each of those questions in a much more systematic and, if you wish, a bit more traditional way when we go class by class in our course. And I want to close with a couple of footnotes. First of all, the course is meant for the 20 students that were selected. I don't exclude, we will publish the syllabus. If someone wants to listen to some of the classes without disturbing the students that are front and center here, they have to be in this course. But I welcome whoever wants to come over and respectfully listen to class. At the same time, tonight or tomorrow morning, I will post the first version of the syllabus, and so you will see which topics we will deal with, and what day, at what time, during the course, starting on the 29th of January and ending on the 5th of April. So that's all for now. Of course, if you have questions, I'm more than welcome to try to reply with more questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrea. For sure, that was a very rich lecture. I've already learned something. As of now, I'm on a diet. No robot is going to push me. We have a few minutes for questions. I saw your hand first. Who else? Okay. 1, 2, 3. Go ahead. Yes, but please make sure your question is brief, so others can also have time.
Okay, I'll try to be brief. Thank you very much for your lecture. So actually I have 2 questions, but I wanted to introduce them with a thought experiment about a society where all cars are driving cars, or nearly all of them. So is a society, for example, intersections are not needed to have red lights because the cars communicate with each other. But there will be still humans, or at least human drivers, that want to have detours, that don't want to get to predestined destination, that want to have detours. And as such, my 2 questions are: how will human freedom be in such a world where there are only driving cars and algorithms taking people to places determined? How will human freedom be here? And the second, if there is a situation similar to yours where there is a collision between a human driver and a self-driving car, who's liable then? Thank you.
Okay. I collect 2 or 3 and then, okay.
Yes, please.
Hello, my name is Christina Giratova. I would like to ask 2 questions. The first one, in Dubai, they have been already testing the driverless drones. So I would like to know what algorithm they are using, if it's, if it actually would kill, what would be the, how would it solve the trolley problem? And then the second question, Paris has announced that it would like to become also the first city using driverless shuttle buses for the Olympics in 2024. So is that going to happen, in your opinion? Thank you.
All right.
Let's take one more.
I'll take one more and then I try to briefly answer those.
Hello, my name is Vladimir. One question, I guess, about the trolley problem, because as far as I know, already in many cars implemented system of the faster reaction where they have lasers looking forward, analyzing the situation on the road. And if there is an object which is rapidly short distance between the car and this object, the car reacts very fast. So I'm not understanding why we're looking on the trolley problem, which part of the people will die, 1 person or 5, when we can basically save them all. If car will see 2 objects and can do nothing, it emergency stops. It's not a man who sleeps because it's drunk, it's a car that's worked. Or it damage to the, for example, historical heritage, but it saves human life because we, in our, I guess, everyone's state constitution, we value human's life as the highest thing on earth. So basically, my question is why we want to kill people in trolley problem? Why not to save them all?
So meaning, why did I teach this class, basically? No, indeed, as you've seen, I'm perfectly in line with you. What I'm trying to demonstrate is that we're spending too much time talking about this problem, and that technically it is one of those extreme cases and scenarios that we can only use to distill some useful policy questions which are not the solution to this problem, but they are the problem inspires us to tackle. And it's a bit like perfect competition. Like a lot of people say, well, why do you study this? Because it will never happen. At the same time, it's an extreme model that we can use to, although there are some constraints to the extent to which we can discuss second best cases. You know, in particular, the theory of second best by Kenneth Arrow tells us that it's not very easy to just approximate perfect competition and having a ranking of social outcomes and scenarios based on how far you are or how many elements are missing, because it's impossible to establish that ranking. But still, you know, I take it as as an evidence that we are on the same page. I know that self-driving cars in most cases will have a solution to this, and that regardless of how the infrastructure is built, which could totally avoid the problem, even the technical solutions embedded in self-driving cars are such that something completely unforeseen should happen. And when this happens and the car stops too abruptly, what might happen is that the occupant is injured because there's physical limits to what we can bear in terms of multiple of our weight, let's say 10 or 12 Gs of us being, for example, into a car that stops so quickly, we might probably bump somewhere. So we need to go and work on that as well. So there might be extreme cases in which you think, you know, this could happen, but they are so extreme, so absolutely extreme, that I'm totally with you in saying, I don't think we're going to kill anyone with this. The only way in which we can kill anyone with a self-driving car, depending on the choices that we make, is through a cyber attack. So if you hack the self-driving car system, and this is why, you know, I started laughing 4 or 5 years ago when I was talking to a friend of mine who was an engineer who told me, in 10 years from now, the most likely cause of a traffic accident, and probably 10 years was a bit too exaggerated, but the most likely cause of a traffic accident will be a cyber attack. But now I see why he meant that, meaning that everything is so perfect, but as always, when you rely on the external infrastructure, if the external infrastructure is not safe and it's hacked, then all the system is hacked. So either all the cars stop, like in science fiction movies, or the cars start doing things that are unpredictable or predicted by somebody else with not necessarily benevolent intents. Now, going back into the previous questions, the 2024 shuttle buses. I don't know if it's going to happen, but I see merit in this, meaning I see that a city could still plan its urban transportation in a way that doesn't allow cars in, but it uses car pods, for example, or trains, clusters of cars that go all in the same at the same speed, and they detach from the worm, if you wish, from the cluster when they want to change direction, and they join another train. This is something that has been demonstrated, tested. It could happen. Who makes money out of this? We don't know yet. So that's a little bit of a problem. But the Paris intent, I mean, to me, it's an interesting plan, but it's probably following into at least one other administration as mayor of Paris. So I'm not sure these things can happen so seamlessly. Drones and algorithms. I think to the extent that I know, these drones still incorporate only a little bit of support from the ground, but mostly sensors, what we call LiDAR sensors, that look at the surrounding environment. They try to detect objects, they have a destination and they try to land in that type of destination. They don't have any other form of intelligence that is embedded in there. There's more intelligence being, unfortunately, embedded in autonomous weapons, in drones that are typically taught to behave autonomously. Even when communication is cut during a mission, they still know where to go and whom to kill. And this is what has motivated a number of experts around the world, including Toby Walsh, for example, a famous Australian artificial intelligence expert, to really mobilize to try and impose a moratorium on autonomous weapons, which is not going to be successful anyway, because there's too much interest in this and the competition tilts whatever genuine good intention. Collision between drivers and humans. Well, we have a legal system that typically is based on the strict liability that looks at the responsibility of the driver. And we don't know what happens when there's no human driver. We know what happens when there is a human driver. The human driver typically is responsible. And so that's, if you wish, the easiest of the questions. The insurance company will have to compensate the owner or the user or the original developer of the self-driving car. It could be an owner, or it could be, for example, Uber. If Uber is using self-driving cars, they will be the owners of the cars that we use for urban transportation. When this happens, then, of course, there is a possibility of escaping liability to the extent that there is an investigation, not a CSI, but an investigation into the behavior of the self-driving car. If the self-driving car has done something that is considered to be unexpected or unforeseen or beyond the sphere of control of the human driver, then the human driver might escape liability. The other one was on detours and the constraining freedom, basically, user freedom. Technology typically comes with this sacrifice of user freedom. Is what Larry Lessig many years ago called the perfect technology of justice. When you say, you know, if you want to get into a website, unless you hack it, it's either you put the password or you don't. It's either you have access or you don't. There's a binary, quite brutal way of looking at things in technology that sometimes excludes our possibility to be very creative. Imagine, I grew up in Rome. This will be a tragedy for me, not being able to jaywalk or do detours. But I think I'm going to have to live with it, unless we can finally decide that this is too much for us. So we're going to live in a world with shuttle buses and not self-driving cars in cities.
Right. I think this is a very rich subject, but we have to close this. I think
I can take questions outside, meaning.
Yes, I'm sure. Well, please join me to thank Professor Renda and wish him success.